This is Basil Valentine on today's News Talk, TNT.
And welcome back to the program for this final overdrive section, where I'm delighted to say I'm joined from the United States by Larry C. Johnson, former CIA analyst. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Basil. Good to be with you.
Great to see you again. Kamala Harris is disappearing for the best part of a week to prepare for the presidential debate. This is surely the weakest possible reason for disappearing from public view. Such a crucial time. I mean, I said in a monologue at the top of the hour that she can't learn. They've got to try and drum it into her like a child of 7 doing their multiplication tables, because they're terrified that she's going to freeze on the spot when Donald rips into her.
Yeah, well, she doesn't have the advantage that Joe Biden has of his advanced age and senility. I mean, she's just flat out stupid. She's not a bright person. Yeah,
no, that's right.
Not competent, and it's a sad thing to watch. But on this kind of stage, it's tough to hide it.
Absolutely, it reminds me of the Mike Judge film Idiocracy. I mean, how someone like her can be propelled to the top of the ticket. I mean, it's no secret that she was the DEI hire as vice president, that, such was the febrile atmosphere in the country in 2020. They had to have a woman of color as VP. And then, of course, for a lot of us, it was self-evident from a long way out that Joe wasn't going to make it. He was far too senile. And then there was a sort of palace coup, wasn't there, with people like Donna Brazile and various black female caucuses rapidly besieging the delegates previously pledged to Biden. Likewise, big Zoom calls, 40,000 on a Zoom call raising money for Harris, pressuring members of Congress to support her. And of course, it would have been impossible to parachute a white man in over the head of the black woman. That would have had all the wrong optics. So as a result, they've ended up with an imbecile.
Well, the problem is she's not black. I mean, let's be candid about it. When she first ran for office in California, she ran as an Asian, as someone from India. She did not run as an African American, because she's not even African American. So she's at least 50% Caucasian. Caucasians being what come out of India. And then her father did have some African heritage on his side of the family, but she just adopted this fake persona, and that's the problem. It doesn't come across as authentic at all. People see the phoniness of it. It's not like she doesn't have the authenticity of Peter Sellers in that movie Being There.
I was going to mention that. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, John C. Gardner, who became who got to be president, and he was mentally unfit for the job, but at least he was authentic with what he was. She's not. So the name Cackles, I think, should be attached to her, because that's all that's the thing she does well. She cackles.
Now the White House are bringing out the Russia disinformation playbook again. Federal officials have accused Russia of using unwitting right-wing influencers in its quest to spread Kremlin propaganda ahead of this year's election. On Wednesday, the Justice Department charged 2 employees of RT, the Russian state media broadcaster, in a scheme to secretly fund and direct the production of social media videos that racked up millions of views. As far as I'm concerned, this is all smoke and no fire, Larry. What do you think? Oh, yeah,
no, it's completely outrageous. So what exactly did they try? What was their misinformation? The Hunter laptop is not real. It's Russian disinformation. Oh, wait a second. That was CIA people that said that.
That's right.
We got to worry about this Russian interference in our elections, except we have actual evidence that the interference was done by the CIA, by the FBI, by the Department of Justice, and cooperating with major media outfits. Now, this notion that because RT reports news that I guess, I'm not sure, because I watch RT, I'm not sure what they find inconvenient in the United States, because it's more of a straight up news program than anything that's on the air with Fox, MSNBC, or CNN. But what's the difference between having RT broadcast into the United States and having CNN, MSNBC, Fox broadcast into Europe or to Asia or to Africa? I mean, if this is now the standard, that media reporting is espionage and interference, then shut down the world. It's got to be a two-way street. But that's not how the United States plays. We're the biggest damn hypocrite out there, because the United States, more so than any country in the world, right now is spending about $4 billion a year. That's appropriated. That's public money to interfere in foreign elections, to meddle in other countries. That money consists of $315 million from the for the National Endowment for Democracy, another $300 million for what's it called? Oh yeah, counter Russian influence campaign, and then $2.9 billion for democracy programs. And this doesn't even begin to count the money that the CIA is spending to run covert actions and to launch social media platforms and to plant false stories around the world. I mean, honestly, as an American, I'm embarrassed. I posted something on my blog, sonar21.com last night, about this comedian in the 1980s, if you remember, Yakov Smirnov. So Yakov was a Russian that came to the United States, and back then we were in the Cold War, but Americans could laugh with the Russian, and he was telling jokes. Now what's happening is the Russians are laughing at America because we've become the joke.
No, you're absolutely right. We were talking about this at lunchtime with Elon Musk, of all people. I mean, it's a social and cultural phenomenon that's infected politics as well, that nobody's able to laugh at anything anymore. But more seriously, diplomacy itself has been denigrated, hasn't it? If it hadn't been for Reagan Gorbachev, we might have had a nuclear war by now. But the current thinking is that any form of diplomacy is appeasement. There's no such thing as diplomacy, effectively. If you talk to the enemy, you are their friend and on their side. I mean, it's a regression hundreds of years back in the past. I mean, even in the Middle Ages, we had ambassadors to different countries and things. I've never known this in my lifetime, Larry.
Yeah, well, if you go back to let's call it the height of the Cold War in the 1970s with Richard Nixon, even though the Russians were directly supporting the Vietnamese and helping the Vietnamese defeat us in Vietnam, there were still conversations going on between Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger, and their Russian counterparts, and substantive negotiations which led to genuine arms control agreements, which, as you rightly noted, backed us away from the nuclear threshold. Well, it's just the opposite now. There is no conversation, and the Russians are issuing increasingly stern, stark warnings to the West that they better tread carefully because they've entered dangerous territory, and that Russia's not going to sit back idly and let them and be threatened by the United States or any of the NATO countries.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Ritter was saying on this channel actually the other day that we're closer to nuclear war than ever before. We could all be dead by the morning because there are no adults in the room. Do you think if Trump does get back in, and again here on TNT, Jeffrey Tucker on Tuesday when I was talking to him on the Muckrakers program said, there's no way Donald Trump is going to be allowed to become president again. But do you think, should he manage to overcome the machinations of the deep state and the bias of the corporate media, that we might finally see some sort of new dawn for humanity and an end to the endless warmongering that has plagued us for the whole of this century, really?
Yeah, well, we'll be better off if that happens. At least Trump is open, amenable to conversations with both the Chinese and the Russians. But the problem is so much of our political establishment is not. And this attack is not just on RT. I just saw the news that they've indicted the Department of Justice has indicted the American citizen Dimitri Simes and his wife for sanctions violations. Now, Dimitri fled the Soviet Union in 1972 because he was a dissident and opposed communism. And now, this dissident who became an American citizen was the head of the Nixon Center, and then it became known as the Center for National Interest, but nonetheless was the president of that for 30 years, who helped formulate much of U.S. policy to deal with the Soviet Union and then with Russia. And they're indicting him because what he did is he was indicted initially, he was under investigation initially for the Russiagate, completely fabricated, made up crap by the FBI and the Department of Justice. And, they put him in square in the crosshairs, and he didn't do anything wrong. The only thing he did wrong was agree to try to provide advice to Donald Trump on foreign relations, something he was eminently qualified to do. So, it's come to the point now that it is America that is becoming the fascist state. It's America that's acting like a Stalinist dictator. And it sickens me to see this. It's despicable.
No, I fully echo what you're saying. Another aspect of it, I'm no fan of the Green Party's climate change policies, but the so-called Democratic Party have been doing their best to eviscerate the third-party candidacies, both of Robert F. Kennedy, so much so that he's flocked to Trump's banner, and Dr. Jill Stein. Now, central to democracy is pluralism, and yet the Democratic Party have been going to law to stop Robert Kennedy and Jill Stein getting on the ballot paper. So terrified are they of leaking votes. Now, I mean, at what point do people wake up and realize that the whole political spectrum, with the Democratic Party posing as this sort of vaguely left of center, but ultimately a centrist, really mainstream America? I mean, it's provided the president of the United States for 12 out of the last 16 years. But the centrists are